In 1158 BCE, work was laid down in the Egyptian village of Set-Maat. For weeks, the workers had not been receiving the rations of food to which they were entitled. They would work no more until things changed. Their supervisors, on the other hand, seemed to have had little idea on how to handle the situation. In today's episode, we shall see how all this came to be, how in ancient Egypt, a culture we often and perhaps wrongfully see as a system ruled by an almighty pharaoh, citizens were able to put forward demands in their own interests. This is the story of the first strike ever recorded in human history. I am your host Morten Eriksson. Welcome to Ancient History. We find ourselves in the village of Set-Maat, today known as Deir el-Medina, located on the western bank of the Nile, just across the river from Luxor. The name means the place of truth, and accordingly the people who lived there were called the servants in the place of truth. They were skilled workers and artisans laboring on the different official sites that were in the area. The earliest traces of the settlement are from the time of Thutmose I in about 1506 to 1493 BCE. It existed throughout the 18th to the 20th dynasties and reached its peak during the 20th dynasty. However, in 1110 to 1080 BCE, during the reign of Ramses IX, it was finally abandoned. Ramses IX was also the last pharaoh to be buried in the Valley of the Kings. On walking distance to the north lay the Valley of the Kings, the famous grave complex hosting many of Egypt's pharaohs. Funerary temples lie to the east, and the Valley of the Queens, the resting place for many of the pharaoh's wives, lay to the south. Hence, Set-Maat was strategically placed, and it has been speculated that it was deliberately placed apart from other populations, since the workers here worked in the tombs with the secrets and treasures. The village, placed in a curious place, was walled in. The area lacked any cover from the burning sun and was enclosed in a natural amphitheatre. It does not appear to have had any protection of greenery during its nearly half-millennia-long existence. Although there are signs that the main road may have been shaded somehow. The nearest well was half an hour away. Still, here lived about 68 households in an area of 5,600 square meters. The typical building was 70 square meters in size. The settlement was home to a mixed population of employed laborers. They were stonecutters, plasters, artisans or painters, to name some, working on the varying tombs. They were organized in two groups, left and right, each group responsible for which side they worked on in the tombs, left or right. Each side had a foreman supervising the village half and its work. When working, they stayed overnight at a camp located closer to the work site. Traces of the camp can still be seen. These were relatively free citizens. The village could, translated to our times, be considered to be an upper-middle-class community. The workers were skilled, well-paid, and had a well-worked-out legal system. Cooked meals were brought up to them from the village. Salaries were usually paid in rations, and these rations were about 3 times as large as that of a typical agricultural worker. They seem also to have had the opportunity to take other secondary working contracts. In the years 1186 through 1155, Egypt was ruled by Ramses III. His years as pharaoh were to be quite unfortunate, as his rulership came to coincide with the beginning of the Bronze Age collapse in the Mediterranean, and with what seemed to have been a decade-long climate change. This affected his rule. The pharaoh had as one of his responsibilities a code called Maat. Note the word Maat in the village name. It meant that he was obliged to uphold balance and stability in the kingdom. This included the guarantee of a steady supply of food and especially grain in the realm. If the subjects could not eat, the pharaoh was to blame, or at least was obliged with the task to find a solution. Paying wages for the royal construction workers was usually unproblematic and taken well care of. The work was important since the pharaoh's transition into the afterlife was also important, so paying the wages was included in the duties of Maat. These, however, were hard times. The kingdom was invaded several times during Ramses III's reign, and although he successfully stopped 2 invasion attempts by the Sea Peoples and other incursions by the Libyans, the state became unstable and the treasury strained. Adding to this, or perhaps being the source of the regional turmoil, was a dramatic change to almost 2 decades of colder weather. The harvests became smaller in Egypt, and the state saw increasing problems in its ability to uphold both the costly military campaigns and the supply within the realm. When the ideals of Maat failed to be upheld, unrest spread. Although it is a fact that there were inferior harvests during the reign of Ramses III, it is not conclusively agreed upon what was the reason. We do know that the cold weather affected most of Europe and the Mediterranean countries for more than a decade. It has been proposed that this was an effect of the volcanic eruption called Hekla III. Hekla is one of the major volcanoes on Iceland, and we know that she had a major eruption in this period. We just don't know if it was at this time. Nonetheless, the weather became cold, harvests failed, and people starved. In the 29th year of Ramses III's reign, the delivery of supplies and rations to the workers in Set-Maat apparently broke down. The system that was in place did not manage to keep them supplied. Unexpectedly, the workers laid down the work and put forward the demands. The events are preserved on papyri that has been preserved to our days. On the 21st day of the 2nd month, the workers and the scribe Amenacht concluded that they had not yet received any rations. Amenacht went to the nearest vizier, named To, and put forward their request. It appears that they 2 days later got at least some units of emmer wheat. Problems continued, however. The papyrus continues. On the 10th day of the 6th month, the workers marched by the forts and walls guarding the way to the funerary site, protesting that 18 days had elapsed in the month and that they had still not gotten their rations. The workers then sat down behind the building of Thutmosis III, which were a small way from the Ramesseum. They were accepted by the officials who listened to their demands, and they seem to have spent the night at the site. On the 11th day of the same month, they again rose to demonstration, passing the southern gate of the temple of Ramses II. The day after, they spent the night spread out in the gateway. They managed to enter the temple area where a scribe, 2 police officers and 2 gatekeepers were present. The police officer named Montmes went to nearby Mo to get the mayor, but seemed to have failed to bring him. Eventually, a pharaonic official came to the site to hear their complaint. They told him that they had put down the work due to hunger and thirst. They said that there was neither clothing, fish, ointments, nor vegetables. On this day, the rations of the 5th month seem to have been issued to them. Things seem to have calmed down for a short while, but in the 7th month, the work was again laid down, and this time the artisans went to the necropolis and sat down in strike. At this time, the harsh words used caused the temple guards to beat a man called Mose for having misused the sacred name of the pharaoh. By now, the officials were becoming annoyed with the protesters and shouted orders to them to return to work. Officers were sent to bring them back, but they refused, stating that evil had been done, since Maat had been broken. In the 8th month of the 28th day, 3 representatives of the strikers met with the chief of police. The officer explained that rations had not been taken away, but rather that nothing was to be found in the granaries. At this date, half a ration was distributed to the strikers. On the 2nd in the 9th month, the strikers were given 2 bushels of emmer wheat as ration. Obviously, it was too little, as the workers intended to leave the area and go down to the harbour to try to get hold of more. This action was, however, stopped by the scribe Amanacht. Again, on the 13th of the 9th month, the workers protested yet again, for they were hungered. On this occasion, they sat down in strike behind the mortuary temple of Meremta, which were some 350 meters south of the Ramesseum. Again, they were given some wheat, but not enough to fill the full rations. By this time, there seemed to have been some general disorder inside the temple area. Sanctuaries were vandalized, and there were accusations of a man taking advantage of wives of the strikers. It is in any case clear that there were uncontrolled civil unrest. Here ends the general remarks on the event, but some addendum paragraphs give hints about how the problem eventually was solved. There seemed to have been not just a shortage of grain throughout the year, but also of other things like fish, vegetables and clothing. It seems like the staff appointed to supply these things to the workers' village over time were expanded. The text mentions furnishing of 24 water carriers, 20 fishermen, 14 woodcutters, 12 gardeners, 2 date purveyors, 8 builders and 8 washermen, to supply the needs of the village and its inhabitants. The list includes 88 men, in contrast to the 23 that had been at their disposal in the list just 2 months before. These are the main events of the first strike ever recorded in human history, and it is clear that during the work on Ramses III's own sanctuary, supplies failed during the entirety of the 29th year of his reign. Likewise, we see that official power was not that strong. And although there were police and officials in the area, we see that they had trouble keeping things under control once the protests became a movement. It is also clear that there was a shortage of grain in the realm, but we can also see an underdimensioned infrastructure for supporting the workers in the village, a problem that was solved over time. And finally, it is also clear that apparently the workers felt that they could make these demands without risking severe punishment from the pharaoh's officials. That if their cause was just, they had the right and the power to make their claims. Hi again. If you liked this short documentary, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And if you would like to help me to make even better documentaries about the past in the future, please consider joining me at Patreon. I've put a link to my site in the description below. See you next time.